Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're going to talk about thou shalt not steal. We're going to talk about living generously, stealing from God. We're going to talk about, is it right to pay your tithe now that we're living in the New Testament, and all kinds of great stuff like that. You're not going to want to miss it. Hang on till the end. It's going to be a blessing to your life. I'm positive of that. Let's go. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Hearth, where we believe the only good place to build a fire is on a firm foundation. I'm your host, Elijah Bowers, and if this channel blesses you, please remember to give us a like, give us a subscribe, and let's jump right on into this. Exodus 20, verse 15, thou shalt not steal. Now, it sounds pretty simple, right? Well, the simplest answer is theft. Theft of property, theft of anything, even if it's not property, position, church members. Don't steal church members for your ministry out of something else. Don't steal talent out of another ministry. We kind of talked about that on the last episode. Don't steal credit for something that you didn't do. Not only is that lying, but that's also stealing. So don't do that. Don't steal it. Don't try to steal a position in a ministry or on your job from someone else in line to get it. That's worked hard for that. Kidnapping. Actually, I think this is the primary definition for the word steal in Hebrew that the Jews use. Is they say this is a banning of kidnapping. Obviously, kidnapping needs to be banned. And so all of that is definitely stealing. So that's really simple. But what about spiritual stealing? What does that mean in your relationship with God? Well, let me jump into a scripture, Malachi 3:8. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. Ye are cursed with a curse, for ye have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in mine house. And prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. So, this is going to be the episode about tithing. What is tithing? Tithing is when you give 10% of your income to the church, or in the Old Testament, to the temple. And they were very, very dogmatic about it in the old law. So they would tithe on, like if they grew even a spice, even, mint or cumin or something, they would carefully divide 10% out of that spice, and they would take it to the temple and give it to the priesthood. And so he says right here that not only should you pay the tithe, but you should take it into the storehouse. So what does it mean for us? What is a storehouse for us? Well, for them, the storehouse would have been all of the extra food, because everything you harvest, you're not going to eat in a day. So you put it out in the storehouse. That's going to be the seed that you sow your field with the next year. That's going to be what feeds you through the winter time. It's going to be where you store it. It's going to help you in times of famine. And so that is your local church. I am not your storehouse. I can't be your storehouse. I'm an evangelist. I'm not your local church. I'm not going to be there when, your kids are sick and in the hospital and you need someone to pray. I might be in another state, right? I'm not going to be there at, the midnight hour when you need someone to come and pray with you because you're about to lose your mind. I'm not going to be the one at your dad's funeral praying with you, probably. That's going to be your pastor. That's going to be your local church. So it's where you store something up for times of need. You can't store up in a TV ministry. You can't store up in a ministry that's so large that they're not going to have anything to do with you, right? You've got to store up in knowing them that labor among you, right? And so you pay your tithe to your local church. You pay your tithe to your pastor. And that is exactly what the tithe did in the Old Testament. When they would pay their tithe, it would maintain the ministry. It would maintain the house of the Lord. It would make repairs over time to the house of God. It would make sure that the ministers had food to eat because they couldn't grow their own food. And so that's what the tithe does. The tithe does not go to the poor. You don't give your tithe to a poor person on the side of the road. That's not tithing. That's alms. Alms are required also, but it's not tithing. Tithing goes to the ministry. It has to go to the ministry because the fact is you come in every single week and your pastor preaches to you and feeds you and the lights are on and the plumbing is working but all of that costs money. Every bit of that is time and labor. And so the laborer is worth their hire. And so you've got to be faithful to the ministry to sustain it with your tithe. Now, if you look up tithing online, almost everybody is against it. I'm amazed. Of course, I've never had much reason to Google it because I already know what I believe. However, I was completely shocked and dismayed when I was kind of researching some things for this episode and the amount of vitriol that's against tithing. And so I just thought I would bring up some of the most common objections to tithing and deal with them because they're all completely ridiculous. Now, the first objection to paying tithes is that's the law. It's absolutely not the law. Tithing predates the law. For one thing, Jacob, when he vowed to the Lord at an altar, began to pay tithes in Genesis 28 and 22. It's when he was at Bethel. Okay, you know what the word Bethel means? Bethel is house of God. Beth is house. El is God. House of God. And so he went to the house of God, went down to the altar, and then when he got up from the altar, he paid 10% for the rest of his life. What does that sound like? You go to the altar, you give your heart to the Lord in the house of God, you get up, and you pay 10% for the rest of your life. That's what you do. And there's nothing wrong with that. And he did that before the law. God didn't give that to Moses to put the people in bondage, and then Jesus didn't set us free from that. That was something Jacob did. Before Jacob, probably where he got it, was Abraham, who paid tithes to Melchizedek. But now, that is a little bit deeper and a little bit bigger than people give it credit for, because I hear the same argument that it was of the promise because Abraham did it, but there's another argument there that I've not heard anyone else say, so I'm going to throw it out there. But let me first read to you what I'm talking about in Genesis so that I can make this case. This is Genesis 14:18. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. And he, Melchizedek, blessed him, Abraham, and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered all thine enemies into thy hand. And he, Abraham, gave him, Melchizedek, tithes of all. Everything that he had as spoil, as income from that battle. Is it true that Abraham is the father of our faith, not the father of the law? That's Moses. He's the father of faith, and we are blessed in blessed Abraham. And the seed of promise wasn't just Isaac, it was Jesus. We know all that from the Pauline epistles. I'm not even going to run through all of that. That's so well established. There's not even a debate about that. And so we know this, so that the father of what we believe is Abraham, and he paid tithes in grace. He believed God, and it was counted unto him as righteousness. Part of that faith in God was paying his tithe. And so we know that. But now, there's a more important part to the fact that of all people to pay tithes, it was Abraham. And to all people, it was Melchizedek. This is super important. When you study the book of Hebrews, what you find out is that especially chapter 7. If you're really interested in this, I'm not going to read through entire chapters of the Bible on this podcast, but go back if you're really struggling with this. Go back and just read through Hebrews where it talks about Jesus and Melchizedek, especially chapter 7. And you know what you find out? It makes the case that we live under a new priesthood with new sacrifices, all based on a scripture in Psalms that says, Thou, talking about the Christ, Thou art forever a priest after the order of Melchizedek. I didn't read that. I might have misquoted that just a tiny bit, but the gist of it was right. Thou art forever a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And so Jesus is our high priest, and his priesthood is after the priesthood of Melchizedek. And so the reason that's important is because the priesthood of Melchizedek receives tithes from them that believe God, and it's counted unto them as righteousness. Jesus is a priest that receives tithes because that's part of the law of faith that we now live under, right? Faith doesn't mean you can do anything you want, anywhere you want, at any time you want, because you believe God. Even devils believe and tremble. We know that, right? We live according to the law of faith. We have to obey our faith. And so Jesus is the priesthood associated with that law of faith. The priesthood offers the sacrifice of the body, the word of God, the body of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. That's our new sacrifice. He's our new priest, and the order of Melchizedek receives tithes. There's no way around that. And so Jesus wants your tithe. Now, that leads me right into the second objection against tithing. It's not commanded in the New Testament. It absolutely is commanded in the New Testament. In fact, it's red letter. Jesus is the one that said that we should tithe. Okay, Matthew 23:23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. What should we have done? The weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. What's the new covenant? Judgment, mercy, and faith. We're saved by faith. But so we think that because we have judgment, mercy, and faith, and we're under the new covenant, that we ought not tithe. That's not what Jesus said. He said, these weightier matters you should have done, and not leave. Don't leave. That's what people are saying. Well, we're under the new covenant, so we're going to leave that behind. He said, no, not to leave the other undone. Jesus wanted them to tithe. He wanted them to do it. He just didn't want them to be hypocrites and pay their tithe and not live right. That's judgment. You can't make a judgment between right and wrong. Mercy, you have no mercy for other people. Faith, you don't have any faith in God. You have faith in yourself and your own works. He said you should be worried about these weightier matters instead of being hypocrites about it. But don't leave the other undone. Jesus taught to tithe. It's in the New Testament. Now, the objection to that, if you can believe there would be an objection. I mean, people on the internet can be so mind-numbingly stupid. And I say that as somebody who is right now on the internet. So, I guess take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But it's just unbelievable to me that anybody would even say this. But I came across an argument that, well, Jesus said that in the Old Testament. But nobody would say that about the Sermon on the Mount, which he said before this. Even earlier in his ministry, he said, you say, thou shalt not commit adultery. I say, if you look on a woman to lust after her, you've committed. Well, everybody knows that's New Testament. How about doing to others as they would have you do unto them? That's New Testament. Man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. That's New Testament. This is all New Testament. If Jesus didn't preach the New Testament, then I don't know what we're even doing here. I'm just going to stop making these videos and stop preaching, and because Jesus, I'm not even following Jesus. If you say that, then you're saying I'm not supposed to follow Jesus. I'm supposed to follow the apostles. I don't follow the apostles only. I like the apostles, but I am a follower of Jesus, and if he said it in those gospels, it's right. I don't care what the apostles said. I don't care what the apostles did. They cannot do away with what Jesus said. They cannot override what Jesus did. They preach the gospel. Jesus is the gospel. And so you can always follow what Jesus said. Take it to the bank. So these are New Testament principles. Keep the tithe, recognize the weightier matters. Now, when I was in college, I didn't come across anybody saying this online, but when I was in college, I had a sociology professor who decided to get on his own soapbox, I suppose, during class one day, and he gave us a whole big long thing about how tithing isn't right, and tithing is just, the church trying to get your money. And so the point he made was, when a family would bring their tithe to the temple, they would actually eat it. And so he said the tithe isn't even a gift to someone else. It's something that you keep holy unto the Lord. That's only partially true. The tithe was a sacrifice. And so the sacrifices, the meat sacrifices and things, except for the whole burnt offering, I believe that was the only exception to this. The giver always ate a portion of the sacrifice. The priest always got a portion of the sacrifice, and God always got a portion, which would have been the fat and the caul above the liver and the entrails and the skin, and that would all be burned outside of the camp. And so God always got his portion, and the priest, unless it was a whole burnt offering, the priest got a portion, and unless it was a whole burnt offering, the giver got a portion. So why did you eat part of your own sacrifice? Well, the idea there isn't that I don't make sacrifices unto the Lord. I just keep everything and it's all about me, me, me. The idea there is I am the chief beneficiary. My children are the chief beneficiaries of my obedience to God, my sacrifices to God. That when I pay my tithe, I'm not taking food out of the mouths of my children. I'm not taking anything away from my children. I'm putting a blessing on my children. Because as I read at the beginning of this, Malachi said, I'll turn and give you a blessing you can't even contain. God will bless you more when you give than when you withhold it to keep it. And so that's the point that they ate. And they didn't eat it all. They didn't get it all. It was still a sacrifice unto the Lord. But any sacrifice you make to the Lord, you are blessed more than God's blessed. God doesn't even need your money. He doesn't need your time. He doesn't need your effort. You need those things. And you need to give those things because you're going to be blessed because of it. So let me tell you a little story. This is a long story made incredibly short, but I pay my tithe in a certain way, and it changes over tent season because I like to give my tithe to my pastor when he comes and preaches at my tent, along with my offering. And so there was a mix-up one year, and my pastor came at the beginning of the tent, and I finished out the month, and then I went back to my old system of paying tithe, and I forgot to pay the tithe off the rest of that month. And totally slipped my mind. It was not intentional at all. It wasn't vicious. And my ministry began to sink in a hole. I think that was September, October, November, December, January, February. Within 5 months, I was just sinking in debt. I couldn't pay. I was swiping credit cards trying to get my bills paid. I was begging the Lord, what is going on? Why aren't you helping me? Why aren't you providing anymore? Where are all the miracles at? What's going on? Why have you shut the heavens of my blessing? What is going on? And as I began to seek the Lord about that, I happened to be flipping through my calendar. Back then I had like a pen and paper calendar that I kept all my meetings and all my offerings in. And I was flipping through that for other reasons. And it fell open to September. And I looked, and it was like a big billboard where I didn't have it written of paying my tithe. And I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't pay tithe. And then I looked at my finances and thought, now I can't even afford to pay that tithe. And so then I'm trying to negotiate with Lord, will you take a payment plan or whatever? I've got to get back on track. And then I looked at my finances and thought, if I don't get this tithe paid and he doesn't start blessing me again, I'll never get out of this. I will never get out of this. I can't do this anymore. So I literally did this. I'm not even telling you to do this, but this is what I did. I swiped a credit card, paid my bills, took the cash, gave it in the offering, paid my tithe to my church. And I'm telling you, it was maybe 60 days or less, every credit card was paid off. I was back on top of all my bills, and I had money in the bank. I mean, it turned around that fast. 5 months of sinking. And as soon as I paid my tithe, God restored my blessing and everything happened again. And so you don't even know that you're not living under your blessing. You might not even know because you've never paid your tithe. But when you begin to pay your tithe, I dare you to do it. This is what he said in Malachi. In fact, this is not what I plan to do, but let me go back and read it. Where does it say it? Yet ye have robbed me, but ye say, wherein have you robbed me? And the tithes and offerings, you are cursed with a curse. And there it is. See, I was cursed with a curse. You have robbed me, even the whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house. And prove me now herewith. Prove me. Prove it. Prove that I'm not a liar. Do it right now. And so I dare you to prove God is not a liar. Test him. Try it out. Pay your tithe faithfully. for 6 months and keep track of all your finances and tell me you're not doing better by paying your tithe. You will 100% find out you're doing better by paying your tithe. I guarantee it. I guarantee it. If the blessing of the Lord doesn't come on you, then just stop paying it, because obviously I don't know what I'm talking about. But I've tested him. I've seen it happen. The blessing of the Lord will get the bills paid. Now, this is a great episode to talk about this, but there's a story in the book of Acts. And when the early church came in, the gospel was about to be launched forth in Jerusalem, Judea, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. And we see now that the gospel has permeated the nations and every continent of the world. And so the gospel went forth. So how did it get its start? Well, it got its start this way, that all of the people got together, and it wasn't their tithe. They paid their tithe, I'm sure. But then they went a step further, and they began to sell off property, and they began to sell off land, and they brought it to the apostles. Not because they wanted the apostles to have a Rolls Royce or another jet, or so that they could live lavishly and buy Armani suits and what have you. But they wanted the apostles to have enough money to spread the gospel, because spreading the gospel, I can tell you by experience, is a very, very, very expensive endeavor. Tents are expensive. I paid almost $10,000 for my tent. I spent $10,000 on my box truck. I spent this year I put about $1,500 into my tent platform, give or take. And so, it's a very, very expensive endeavor to win souls. It's expensive to spread the gospel. If you want to be one of those people that says, I want to help launch the gospel forth, take a moment, hit up BurningLightsMinistries.com. All the links are in the description, the website, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, all the stuff. It's all going to be there. And then I want you to pray about something. It takes a big commitment of people to spread the gospel in a real way, in a significant way. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're reaching forward this year. We're reaching for souls more than ever before. We're spending larger amounts of money to win those souls than ever before. And we don't get paid by YouTube. We don't get paid by a job anywhere. It's offerings that keep us going. And so I'd like you to pray about becoming a monthly sponsor to this ministry. We're winning souls. We're reaching people. We're in the middle of organizing a soul winning crusade where we're going to mobilize the church, send them out on the streets of a state capital later this year. It looks like 3 for sure, 4 maybe. Tent revivals where we're going to go out and we're going to take people out on the streets and try to win souls in those tent revivals, as well as do some new things to try to win souls. And so become a partner with us for souls. Whatever you can do, if you can do something big, if you can do something small, it's going to be a major blessing to this ministry. And I promise you this, we're going to use it well. So consider that. If you want to sign up for that to be a monthly partner, you can cancel at any time. Just go to BurningLightsMinistry/partnership, or just go to our website and click the link. Link will also be in the description. But please consider that because just like then, it was a moment of opportunity to launch the gospel forth. In our generation, there's still a moment of opportunity to make a sacrifice in your finances and send the gospel forth. So let's get back to tithing. So the reality of tithing. People argue against it, and what they say is, we're not supposed to just give 10%. We're supposed to give more than 10%. We're supposed to be led of the Spirit in giving. And I can almost guarantee you that if they're against giving 10% as standard, there's no way they're giving 10%. They're just not. I just don't believe that. I don't think that holds any water. I think that if you're not set to give 10%, you're just going to let it fall off. And so put God first in your finances. Listen, Matthew 6:21, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I know what I'm about to say is going to sound real hard, and I don't mean to be real hard, but these are just statements. Somebody ought to say them, and they are the truth, and I say them with the highest love that I can in my heart. Jesus looked at the rich young ruler and told him, because he loved him, it said he looked at him and loved him and said, sell all that you have. That was a hard statement. This is what you've got to do. You love money too much. You're going to have to sell everything that you've got. And so I'm looking at you with love today and saying, if you're upset at the thought of giving God 10%, you don't love God. You just don't love him. Because if he can't get your treasure, He can't get your heart. You've never given your heart to God if you've never given your treasure to God. If you're willing to steal his tithes, you don't steal from people that you love. You give to people that you love. So I agree with the point that we shouldn't be bound to 10%. We should give more. Absolutely. But the minimum is 10. Anything less than 10 is stealing. But I don't want to steal from him, and I don't want to give him the minimum. I'm careful to give more than my 10% because I love him. He's the best friend that I've got. I don't mind sharing my money with him. I owe him too much. And listen, if you don't pay 10% to your home church, then you don't love your church. You don't love those people, which means you're not family. You're not really part of this family, not because they demand your money for you to get in the club to become family. They'll accept you as family either way, but you won't let yourself join them because you won't give them your heart. And if you keep a wall up and you don't give that house your heart, then you're not really family. And at that point, you're not even really a member of anything. You're just a visitor. You might sign up, you might sign a piece of paper, but you're not really in your heart a member of any church that you're not paying your tithe to. And so the last thing is this, and I've said this many times in my meetings, and it's the truth. If they gave out the mark of the beast today, and I don't care what you believe about, your eschatology or whatever. I don't care. I don't care, pre-trib, post-trib. I'm not talking about that today. I'm going to make a video about that probably eventually, but not right now. But let's just say they gave it out today. If you don't pay your tithe, you would take it. And the reason is because if you can't give God 10% when they pass out that mark, you'll have to give God 100%. Now, none of your money works. You can't buy or sell. I mean, if you can't give him 10%, you'll never give him 100%. So just bear that in mind, that you're a mark taker if you don't pay your tithe. Now, I know maybe that's making you really, really, really upset. And I know it. But you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. He wants your money. It's not me. You don't have to pay. Tithe has nothing to do with me. I don't pastor a church. I ought not get anybody's tithe. Tithing goes to the church. Now, I don't think anybody that gives their tithe and doesn't understand tithing and where the tithe, I don't think God's mad at that. I'm just teaching what's proper. Okay. Now, offerings are above and beyond the tithe. Tithe does not count as offerings. Offerings are to many, many ministries. Your home church also, but evangelists like me, other ministries that are touching your life. If people are sowing into you, you ought to sow into them. If somebody, blesses you, if you get a miracle in somebody's meeting, you should give them money. And I'm not being hard when I say that, but the workman is worthy of their hire. Listen, you would pay a doctor that did surgery. Why not pay the little woman of God that laid hands on you, even if she's not a preacher? If a little widow in your church lays hands on you and a tumor is dissolved, you know how much you would have paid a doctor to get rid of that tumor? You can slip her $100. You can slip her $20. You can give her something. Be grateful from the heart and be grateful with your finances and live generously. Make sure you always live generously. Help fund the gospel because you love people, because you love God, because you love the ministry. And always remember this, that the amount is not what affects God or touches God, but it's the amount of sacrifice. Luke 21:2. And he saw a certain poor widow casting in thither 2 mites. And he said, Of a truth I say unto you that this poor widow hath cast in more than they all. For all these have of their abundance cast in unto the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all her living that she had. Let me end this thing with a story. I had a situation where I was doing really poorly. I was kind of behind. I only had a couple $100 in my bank account, period. And I seen someone and the Lord spoke to me to give to them. And I thought, I don't have it. I don't have anything to give. Look at me. I'm almost broke. I got kids to feed, God. And the Lord spoke to me and gave me an amount. And I barely had enough left in my accounts to keep the accounts open. I didn't have a single account with $100 left. By the time I had to clear out all my savings and all my checking and every single account that I had to just bottom them all out to give this amount. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had to drive about 1,500 miles the next day to my next meeting. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I just got in my car. I kept on going. I got out there, preached at some small places, went around. Shouldn't have been any kind of spectacular offering. When I got home, I had $10,000 in my pocket. It shocked me. That's not something that I would normally get in those specific churches. It's just something that the Lord did. Now, why? He didn't have to do that. He could have provided for this person some other way. He could have provided for me some other way. Why did he do that? Because I was in bondage, and I had this idea that because I didn't have a lot of money, I couldn't live generously. But what I've since learned is the blessing of God is greatest in your life when you recognize that God's your provider, God's got your back, and you can live generously knowing that your Father will not let you fail, that your Father will always provide, that your Father... Now, am I telling you to clear out your bank account tomorrow and go just give it to some random person? That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying when something wells up, because at first God didn't tell me an amount, I just wanted to help her. But I was too scared because of my circumstance to help her, to follow that conviction of the Spirit, that compassion of the Holy Ghost. And so God taught me a lesson. You can live generously in lack as easily as you can live generously in abundance. And the blessing of God is greatest when you can live generously in lack. So what I'm saying is this: if you feel like you don't have enough money, but you want to give somebody money, give them the money. If the Lord speaks to you, just do it. He's going to bless you. He's going to provide. Because when I got back, I wasn't rich. I didn't take a big vacation because I had $10,000. But you know what? I paid off where I had swiped my credit card to pay my bills. As you can tell, I've done that a lot through the years. And I got back on top, put a little bit in savings, and everything was fine again. I flipped back over. And the way I flipped back over was the Lord told me to give. And that really worked because it was Spirit-led. Be Spirit-led. And if you think the Spirit is leading you to be stingy and to hold on to all your money, that ain't God. That's you. That's your flesh. That's the devil, but it ain't God. God is always the voice saying, live generously. I got you. I got you. I'm your Father. I'll take care of you. I'm a dad. I want to take care of my kids. They're going to have food on the table if I got to cut off my arm and sell it. That's just the long and short of it. I will go sell my blood to put food on the table before I let my kids go hungry. And that's what your Father's willing to do. Shed blood to provide for you whatever you have need of. That's what he did, didn't he? And so leave this knowing, number one, I love the Lord. I can give. Number two, I love the Lord. I can pay my tithe. And number three, the Lord loves me. And I can live generously, and I can help others, and I can support the gospel, and I can support my local church, and I can feed the hungry, and I can help the widow, and never worry about myself, because God will always care for me. I hope you like that. If you did, if you enjoyed it, like, subscribe. Catch us next time. Keep on burning.